Hey screen printers, it's Ryan from Ryonet. I'm excited to introduce that we're distributing the Amergraph exposure units. Today we're going to check out the Advantage 150 single point exposure unit. Now, without having to use this exposure unit until the other day, I have to say I'm very impressed with the quality, the detail, and how good of screens this exposure unit actually makes. So we're going to go over some of the features, and we're also going to do a comparison test between a standard fluorescent tube, UV unit like the X Factor, and the Advantage single point exposure unit. So come on here and check it out. Now this exposure unit is one of those units where you can just tell it's built well. You can see the large reflective bottom underneath the light, which actually is a single point metal halide bulb. Now these exposure units come in different sizes. This is the starter one, so there are actually bigger ones with more powerful bulbs. One thing I was really impressed with it was the quality of the glass. Now obviously glass remits light as it passes through during exposure. This glass, comparative to other single point glass that we used to sell, is so much thinner and cleaner and clearer, but just as strong, which gives you a much better quality or detail in your exposure. The vacuum gauge is also adjustable, so you can set your vacuum pressure whether you want it to be stronger or less, in case you don't want to pull down as hard on a screen. Also, the vacuum does not need a cord. So if you see in here, you can actually, the air actually sucks in through the frame, so you don't need to put a cord on the inside of your frame. The lid has this handy little lever that simply raises with very heavy-duty shocks and then lowers and clamps in the lid. Very, very easy to use. Also, if you check out the casters on the bottom of the unit, these allow the unit to be moved in and out of tight spots for cleaning behind it. One of my favorite parts about the unit actually, because our philosophy is make your darkroom a clean room, and this allows you to easily pull your exposure unit out and clean behind it. The exposure panel is very easy to use. It also have 9 different programs that you can set, so you can save your exposure times for all the different sizes of mesh and emulsions that you'd be using in your exposure process. You can expose with light units or seconds. I prefer light units because the light integrator that the unit has in it actually measures the amount of light, exposure light, reaching your screen. So as your bulb gets dimmer, your screen still gets the same amount of UV energy, even though it might need to expose for a few seconds longer. Also, it's very easy to adjust your time. All you have to do hit is exposure set, and then you can change one of your preset settings accordingly. You also are allowed to set your vacuum pressure time. So right now, it allows the vacuum to pull down for 35 seconds before it starts the exposure process. So we just exposed this screen using the X Factor multi-filament exposure unit that uses UV fluorescent bulbs, very similar to a tanning bed. Now, this is a great entry-level exposure unit for automatic on a beginner level and manual printing, and it's awesome for spot color detail work. But with halftones and very fine detail, it's very important to have a single light source. If you come here, you can actually see how these bulbs work. These bulbs emit light 360 degrees around them, and because there's 8 of them, you have light hitting the screen in multiple angles from multiple areas, so that sometimes your tiny little halftone dots can cross-expose, shrinking or overexposing the dot. What that means is to get a good detail, you typically have to lower your exposure time so it doesn't cross-hatch your halftone dots, which means your screen's not quite as hard. So this is the image that we're exposing, comparing on both exposure units. We put our advanced exposure calculator on this unit, and also we have a gradient scale or densitometer printed on our film. Now this densitometer goes in steps of 10%. You can see our 10% dots down here. The goal of halftone exposure is to catch as many dots as possible, even the very small ones like you see right here. The exposure calculator goes even a step further. We have a 55 line right here, which is what we have 55 line for this 4-color process print, and we have an 85 line right here. So you'll see how well it exposes these tiny, tiny little dots. Typically with a fluorescent tube unit, your LPI to your mesh count is a 5 ratio. So you take 55 times 5, and that's about 275, meaning that we should be able to capture all of our halftone dots on a 275 or higher screen. This particular screen is a 305 mesh screen. However, there's no way we're capturing a lot of the 85 line because the ratio is way too high. We'd have to put it on much higher mesh. With a single point exposure unit, your ratio goes down drastically. So let's compare and contrast these two exposures after washout. Let's expose the same exact screen using the Advantage 150 exposure unit. So we'll simply set the screen in. There's no need to put a cord in or anything like that. And then clamp the lid down. We turn the vacuum on. And then we're exposing this screen for 127 light units. We've already done the exposure testing on the RXP emulsion, and that's the optimal exposure for 305 mesh. So we'll hit start. It allows the vacuum to suck down for 35 seconds, and then it will start the exposure process. Here's the first screen exposed on the X Factor. If we zoom in here, we actually did a pretty good job of capturing the small halftone dots on the open halftones, but on the closed halftones, we lost them at 10 and 5%. We see the same thing up here is where you see your open halftones exposing just fine, but your closed 10% halftones starting to get clouded and lost right here. In the film, we had a lot of halftones through here. They're small halftones, but we did have some halftone gradient on that black. If we pull the film up, we notice that we really didn't catch any of that gradient. So that's how your density scale really tells you what's going on in the side of your image. Overall, I was actually impressed of how well the screen caught small detail halftones, being that it is a fluorescent tube unit. I would give it probably a B+ or an A- on screen exposure. With the screen exposed with the Advantage 150, you see that we captured the 5% closed dots, which were completely lost on the fluorescent tube unit. Also, we even captured some of the 85% or 85 LPI 5% closed dots. We captured all of the open dots all the way down. We captured all of the closed halftone 10% and all of the open halftone 10%. And if you see the image up here where we lost all that detail previously with the fluorescent tube unit, we captured all those small dots in here. So this would turn out to be a much better looking print. I would give this exposure unit as a screen exposure complete, probably an A+, because I really don't see any information that was lost. So if you're looking for the A+ exposure every time, or you want to step your game up as a screen printer, especially if you're thinking about going to an automatic press, remember, good screens make good screen prints. And the Amergraph Advantage 150 and other Advantage exposure units make amazing screens. Check out these exposure units available on our website, or talk to one of our sales reps if you have any questions.